another thing on the perspective of the players, that is these squads which franchises have, they're obviously big ones. They're not your 15-man squads. They're 18, 20, even 20 plus. We have 23, 24 in the IPL to account for injuries, because it's also a long season. Now, how do you deal with a player who, the player knows also after a few games is going to stay on the bench? Because that can also be a
Yeah.
very difficult place to do, because especially if it's an overseas player, because you've traveled from a different country. And even it becomes even more difficult in current times, because you also have to stay in the bubble. You really can't do anything else, but you can go back in your hotel room, sit at the bench, then come back and be involved in team meetings and sort of still know that you may not play. So how do you deal with those players? Because it's very important to keep their morale high as well.
So like the thing with us is like this year we had 24 across the two legs. We had 24 guys. 22 of them played at least one game. So like we've always had this belief, but if you're losing, then you experiment, because like you're losing, you try to figure stuff out. And if you're winning, you still experiment, in the sense we rested Shadab for one game this year. We rested Hassan, had to miss one game because of a personal thing. Fahim missed a few games. We didn't have Monroe for the first leg. You have your limitations, but you also try to experiment as much as possible within that 11 as well. That's where a lot of the flexibility in the batting order, like the things that we're famous for, that comes in, because you try everything possible, because there's a lot of, if you got 10 games, or if you're in the IPL you got 14 or 16 games, there's a lot of time for you to experiment. Teams become too conservative with like trying to win just that one game, rather than like come the playoffs, if you've got like 14 guys who are all in form, it's really difficult to stop you. That's what we learned from like both PSL 1 and PSL 3. So that's one of the things, like with everyone, as soon as they join the team, we're like, you have to be mentally ready. You have to be. So no one is told, or no one is going to even be given the indication that now that you're on the bench, that you're going to be on the bench for the rest of the tournament. So that's the first thing, that like everyone has to be ready at any point. Like as soon as someone switches off, what happens if the guy who is in his place gets a hand injury, gets a hamstring injury, gets a muscle injury, gets anything, gets hit on the head, now there's the entire concussion thing as well. So everyone has to be ready. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, we've always taken pride in the culture and just the launderness of our dressing room, which is like, basically we've always had this belief, like from year one, which we also learned from Wasim Bhai, which was that if these are guys who are going to go out and play a high pressure, intense and that sort of game, you don't want them being under pressure for the remaining like 20 hours of the day and like building up for that. It's about being professional on the field, in the nets, in practice, coming on time. All of that is part of being professional. But like at the end of the day, you're playing a sport, man. You're not like a doctor in a COVID ward. You're not fighting any wars. It's at the end of the day, it's something that you've been dreaming about since you were like 8, 10, 12 years old. This is a privilege that a lot of those guys have. So why not actually enjoy the fact that you're there? Why not enjoy the fact that you've gotten to this point? So I've been told by like players from across the world that we've had one of the best experiences that they've had is in our dressing room. And the only reason for that is that there is no hierarchy as such. We always believe like it's just friends hanging out, that sort of thing. There's always one or two bad apples, but like if the quorum is positive and like optimistic, then those guys also come in with the flow. And so that comes in, like the fact that everyone needs to be ready, that comes in. And the third thing is like, you need to understand people. Like you need to understand if there's a guy who's not going to play, who's had like a couple of bad games and he's sitting outside, he will pout, he will whinge, and that is understandable. If you prepare like an entire year for this exact tournament and you have 2 bad games and it seems like you're not going to be playing anymore, then obviously you feel bad, you feel depressed, you feel all of those things. So then at that moment you have to understand that person. Is that the sort of person that you want to talk to so that you can lift his spirits up and stuff like that, or is that the sort of person who needs to be left alone in such an environment? So that's where a lot of those things come in. And with like national teams, with that's why you see a lot of franchise going with the same guys, even if someone's not really performed 1 season or 2 seasons, they'll still go with that guy because they know him as a person and they know like what he is like when he's out of the team, what he's like when he's out of form, and all of that stuff. So understanding people, I feel like, especially in the franchise game, because you're there for like a month and a half, like in the IPL, maybe for 2 months, no one is going to teach you, no one is going to coach you into something new. Yes, you can change sort of like a mentality sort of thing, match by match, but like no one is going to change any technique or anything like that over the course of those 5-6 weeks. But what you can do is like you can understand those people and like try to maximize them from a human perspective.
There are a few things that you mentioned there. The last one which you mentioned was the continuity, and it's something that others who've been a part of the IPL have also mentioned that because it's a short tournament, only have 2 months. It's not that you're spending a lot of time together like you do in the EPL or football leagues where you've 8-9 months together. So you have to get your act together very soon, and that is why there's a lot of comfort zone which is involved in, be it picking the support staff or picking the players, because the franchises want to be sure that they're able to have an environment where everyone's trying, getting the maximum out which they can possibly. And hence, sometimes there's resistance to change, especially if you are getting decent results. If you're not, and on the flip side of it, if you're not, performing at all, like, you can take the case of Punjab Kings. I don't want to mention RCB, like the Punjab Kings, a franchise which has only qualified for the last four twice, once in 2008 and then in 2014. So because they don't, do well, there are a lot of changes which also don't help them. The other thing that you mentioned here, and it's a very important thing, because we do sometimes, even in India, start equating cricketers to, the people who are on the borders, or the doctors start saying that this is a war. So it's very important that you mentioned that it's not the same. It's nowhere, and I completely agree with it, that it's nowhere the same. The people who are out there in the COVID wards or at the borders, they do a much tougher job than what the cricketers do.
It's actually closer to being an artist than it is to being a Fauji. Like, think of it that way. Like, this is someone who's out there trying to express himself, trying to, this craft of his, this skill of his, he's trying to show that in that way. Like, I mean, with Pakistan and India, like, obviously, like, the national teams are like so ingrained with the ideas of nationalism, like that whatever we say, that's not going to change. But like, at least within franchise cricket, you can sort of bring in that culture which exists in, like, say, the NBA, or, well, not the NFL. Everyone in the NFL thinks they're in the army as well. But like, as far as the NBA is concerned, like, that's a model that I want to follow. Like, to an extent, even like modern European football is, the dressing rooms are run that way.